My intention when I first went to the Middle East was not to do what I did. My hope, my desire, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to interview in person refuseniks. I wanted to talk to people who had refused to serve in the occupied territories. I was specifically hoping to meet with and talk to people who had been conscripted and did not have a conscientious objector status, but believed that it was immoral or against an appropriate military service for what they understood to be the duties of an Israeli to serve as part of the military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Those were the people I was seeking out. Because, in some manner, I understood that those were the people I was among. I'm not a pacifist. I never was. I don't write off or exclude the possibility of the necessity and the utility of armed struggle. I would prefer that it be a part of a well disciplined and well accounted for standing military that can provide a very distinct role in society and is one that does not engage in conscription, but rather seeks to cultivate the excellence of individuals from within society that have the spirit, the comportment, and the commitment to perform that very important role. I do not agree with Plato's Republic and allowing for the military to be made a fetish item of any civilian or bourgeois observer. And there's necessarily a very important role that needs to be performed when it comes to civilian oversight and leadership of the military. But one that does not have the practical, literal experience and responsibility necessarily has to have a distinction from those who do. This is not about giving people room to cover up for crime committed under the guise of the military. It's not what it's about. If you go into the military and you do things, there should be high standards, which also means there should be a very significant manner of accountability you assume. Why? Because you wield it as well. And this is why it is not appropriate for civilians and the military to commingle their resources, especially in a time of crisis. It's not to say that there should be special exception, but it's also not to say that you can debase and degrade the standards you need to uphold for the military in order to make the military a specific kind of culprit or co-conspirator with an understanding that you can subject them to a different standard than you would civilians. It's not acceptable. And this is why I was wrong. Even in a situation of crisis, while it is necessary for the military to be in a role to acquire and distribute provisions to the civilian population, it is not appropriate for what is considered to be necessary for the application of the military's duties to be shared with civilians. If they need it, if they require it, then they need to make a commitment to military service. But if they don't, then there are things they are not obligated to have to take on as their duty. And it's very important that this be preserved and that this be valued. A part of being in the military or being in armed struggle even is understanding that there are things you fight for and that you are in a position where you are protecting something that is valuable, perhaps even sacred. And that your distinct role in this regard is something that is done as a devotion, perhaps even a form of sacrifice, so that that can be maintained and respected and honored. And as I've said before, anybody that would encroach upon it should be dealt with severely. This is what you need to understand. When you make everybody in your society a combatant, everybody is equally accountable. When you allow the military to parse out and share with civilians, regardless of whether or not the civilians want to notice it or pay taxes on it themselves, if they allow themselves to be availed of the advantages, then you do not have a just cause claim to say to opposition that these are civilians and you should not have targeted them. This is a big problem we have had since 2010. Unfortunately, what the Supreme Court did made that problem more compounded. And the refusal of those that allege that they're civilian and somehow precluded from the same kind of standards of accountability the military are, have not done much to mitigate the compounding of that problem. But if you take a stance and you dedicate yourself to providing a specific kind of consideration for people in your society as being outside of the context of your military or your armed forces, then there are consequences when people decide to target them, including if they try to make them sick. Intentionally orchestrate sickness among the vulnerable or among the sacred so that they can be exploited, including for a military objective. There are very specific reasons why you make a distinction between the armed forces and those that are unarmed. You respect the holy people, including the holy people that agree to combat. And if you encroach upon that, there are consequences. And this is exactly the crisis confronting the United States right now. Now, I am not a pacifist. I'm not a conscientious objector. But I said, what did I say? What did I say? The President of the United States is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States. When you agree to join the military, you agree to kill on command, and I would never take a command from him to kill. It's not appropriate for me to join the military when I don't trust the Commander-in-Chief. This is part of the crisis we have right now. You understand? And that is why I don't acknowledge him as a commander-in-chief. That's why I don't acknowledge Joseph Biden as a commander-in-chief. And that's why I have lived most of my adult life without an actual commander-in-chief. You understand? It was not appropriate for you to try to ascribe me as an asset of my father, who did acknowledge a commander-in-chief, and then think that you could try to manipulate me or seduce me or defile or slander me so you can get things from the military you had absolutely no intention of actually taking responsibility for. The time of reckoning has come. Let us not have any further miscommunications. It is not appropriate for anybody to be trying to communicate with me at this point in time with the maturity levels you have been trying to subject me to the entire time I've been indoors. You are going to need to recompile whatever it is, and you're going to need to implement it immediately. There should be no minors involved. There should be nobody that is going to try to split hairs about how they should be preserved or protected specifically because they are a civilian. But that also means they needed to have taken responsibility to assure that they are in a network that is not deceitfully availing themselves of the advantages of what is going on in conjunction with the American military in order to serve their purposes. And that includes trying to launder military assets through the State Department or trying to offload what you want from the military through the Health and Human Services.